Hi everybody, and welcome to this video in which we're going to be taking a look at a production example of how you might use the Nuke Mari bridge. Now first of all, as you can see on screen right now, we've got some awesome footage from Transformers 2, so I've got to say a massive thank you to Digital Domain for allowing us to use this. The second thing I'm going to say as well is that over on our YouTube channel, Frank's already done a video on the Nuke Mari workflow, and I really recommend you sit down and take a look at this if you haven't already. It really covers the ins and outs of every single part of the workflow, including some things which I'm not going to cover here. Now, in a nutshell, the Nuke Mari bridge is a way of taking projection setups, whether they be on OBJs, FBXs, or whether it be on some Nuke geometry. It takes everything about that, so the image you're projecting, the camera you're projecting through, and whatever geometry you're using into Mari. Now, why might you want to do it? Well, there's lots of reasons. First reason, you might see some projection stretching or seaming within your scene. The reason that we're going to cover here is where you get this situation where we might need to create a clean plate. And doing this in a 2D method, where you just paint and roto over and over and over again, that can get a little bit cumbersome. So we can now use the Nuke Mari bridge to take everything about a projection setup for this scene into Mari, paint it up with Mari's high-end digital painting toolset before bringing it back into Nuke. So the first thing I want to show you from this scene, if I just quickly stop our playback, is the method that was actually used to complete this shot. Now, a little bit of kind of behind the scenes, what was going on with this. Basically, obviously, this is the original plate on screen here before Alice turns into a lovely robot. And the issue that they had is there was no clean plate. And obviously, when she turns into that robot, it's a little bit thinner than her human form, and you can see through it in places as well. So they did need to create a clean plate for this shot, and as you can see, we've got a camera move in there, so perspective shift. It would be a lot of paint and roto, and as always we want to try and avoid doing that if we can. So the method used in the final was something like this. What we've done is we've taken a couple of frames here from different parts of the shot, and on this frame DD went in and said, okay, what can we isolate from this frame alone that we could use within a clean plate? And down here we've just got some very basic roto, a little bit of a pre-molt at the end here just to isolate this single section. Then we've got a very basic projection setup, so an image coming in, we've got a camera, project 3D node, and some geometry, and if I view my transform geo, you can see this. So we end up with that tiny part of the image projected on a card in Nuke's 3D environment. Now this camera is locked off in our scene on the same frame as this image, and that's the important part. These two have to match. Now when we do this, I believe about 9 times for this shot, if I view this scene node down here, we end up with something that looks like this. So this is a 3D representation of everything that we need to complete that clean plate in Nuke's 3D space. Now, of course, these cameras being locked off, they're not going to move. These images, just being a single frame, aren't going to move either. So if we now go down and render these out through the moving camera and merge it back over the original image, we end up with something that looks like this. And if I go to different frames of our sequence, you can see that we've got essentially a clean plate that sticks on every single frame of the shot. A very, very good method of doing it. Very quick, very easy, and much, much better than sitting down and doing an awful lot of paint and roto. Now this is obviously one very good method of doing it, and it's all these nodes here. Now in this video I'm going to be using the Nuke Mari setup to take it from this setup on the left to this small setup over here on the right hand side. So you can see there are far fewer nodes, and hopefully, as you'll see in a bit as well, you get a little bit more control over exactly what's going on with your asset. So let's run in and start taking a look. Now the first thing I do is bring in the original plate. I've then gone down and denoised it using Nuke 6.3's awesome new denoise tool. In fact, I've probably done it a little bit too much in this scene, but it is a very, very good reason to go in and denoise your plates before you start painting with them. Now up front, I do want to say one other thing, and this entire scene was actually painted up in 40 minutes in an airport in Cape Town. So bear that in mind as we go through. There are a couple of areas where I would put in a little bit more work if it was for production, but hopefully what you're going to see is that in 40 minutes you can end up with something that is a very, very good result. So after the denoising here, I've gone through and used this height gizmo to unlens distort our scene. Then down here we're going into our basic projection setup. So we have our animated tracked camera for our scene. We've got a bit of geometry here that was available as a result of the tracking process, which was very, very helpful in this instance. We've also got our project 3D node. So if I view our geometry, we're going to see a live projection on every single frame of our sequence. If I go back to frame 10 you can see it updates. And if I go to the last frame, again, it's going to update there as well. And this is matching this geometry very, very nicely. And another good thing here is that the geometry is actually UV'd. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but for now, that is a very, very good thing for us, because as you can see from my lovely green node here, we're going to send it over to Mari. Now, the idea with the Nuke Mari bridge is that when you purchase Mari, you get a scripts folder in there which contains some Nuke scripts that you put into your Nuke script directory, and you get two brand new things within your Nuke environment. The first one, if I hit S on my keyboard, it's going to bring up our project settings, and we get a Mari tab in here. Now, the important thing is this enabled checkbox, and as long as that is turned on, you can see that this listen status says it's listening on port 50007. Now, listening is the important thing. It means it's ready to do something. The second thing that we have is this Mari menu at the very top here. And if I click that, you can see that we've got four options in there, the first one of which is Launch Mari, so I'm going to click that now. Now, this is set up with an environmental variable behind the scenes, so it automatically knows your Mari location. It's going to launch that up for us, and within Mari, we also have a Nuke menu sitting at the top here, and over here in Edit, Preferences, and Scripts, we also have that enabled checkbox. So it's very important to make sure that both of those checkboxes are turned on before this system will work. But when they are turned on, basically Mari is now listening out for something coming from Nuke, and Nuke is now ready to throw something over into Mari. So the way we do this is we want to grab our object, so this could be, as I said before, an OBJ, FBX, or some Nuke geometry. I'm also going to grab our Project 3D node, and then I'm going to come up into our Mari menu, and we can use one of these two options. Now, the send option is basically going to send information from Nuke to Mari either on the same system or directly across to a network address. And the important thing is that it's a live system. Now, obviously in this demo, I've got Nuke, I've got Mari on the same machine, and in a facility, this could be a Nuke system, and I could have a floating license of Mari, and you could just call that up, and the system would work exactly the same. It's basically going to send that information straight away into the other program, and then send it straight away back. Now, export is something slightly different, and this is for when you want to save out that information as a file. Perhaps you want to share it on your network, maybe email it over to your texture painting department. They would then open it up, but the rest of the workflow is exactly the same. So obviously in this instance, I'm going to be using send, so I'm going to go to send projection components. I'm just going to click that. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite it, and the reason if it's asking me that is because it's going to write out the image data as a linear EXR, and this maintains color information between the two programs. I'm then going to pop over into Mari, and we'll see this bake incoming projections dialog. Now, if you're not familiar at all with Mari, this is going to be a little bit confusing to you guys, but basically one of the key features of Mari is that it's a projection painting system. You essentially have this glass screen that sits in front of your model, and you paint onto that, and only when you're happy do you project through it down onto your model, and that process is called baking. So what this dialog is asking us is, do we want to bake it straight down, project it right onto our model, or do we want to keep it on that glass screen? And the reason you might want to keep it there is so you can use Mari's warp tools, so you can erase bits, paint bits on before you put it down onto the model. Now, my own personal preference here is to always bake down that first bit of information, just so I get a nice reference on the model. So I am going to click yes to this. We then have to choose a brand new project setting for Mari, so a channel name, mapping scheme, channel resolution. Of course, you could do this all the way up to 32K if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep this at 2K for now and click OK. And then over in Mari, it's going to bring in the object that we can see here. It's going to bring in our anim cam, and it's going to hook up that image as well. So I'm just going to run over into Mari, and we should see that on the screen. Now I'm just going to quickly make one change, and that is to change our channel from color to scalar, just so we can see our UVs as well. And if I start zooming out, you can see that that is indeed baked down onto our model. Now, the good thing about this workflow is that this is no longer a projection system within Nuke. It's no longer a 2D fix within Nuke. We can use all of Mari's excellent painting tools down the left-hand side here to start to create what is essentially a full asset. Then when we're done with this asset, we've painted it up entirely as we want, we can bring all of that back into Nuke, either as a projection setup or as a UV patch, and then carry on down in our comp. And I'm going to be showing you that shortly. Now at this point, we don't have a huge amount of information from which to clean up a brand new plate within Mari, so I'm going to head back into Nuke, and I'm going to bring over a little bit more information. So I'm going to go back to about frame 30, and because our projection system is live, it's all going to automatically update for us. Now I'm going to grab our projection 3D node, so not our OBJ this time, and we're going to send it over to Mari, adding it to our current project. So with our project 3D node selected, I'm going to go to Mari and do exactly the same as before, send projection components. Again, I'm just going to overwrite that as a linear EXR image. Now, do we want to bake this down? I'm actually not going to bake it down this time. I want to keep it on that glass screen, and I'll show you why in a second. So notice we don't get any project set up this time. We're adding it to the current project. So up here on the right hand side in our projectors list, you can see both of the cameras that I've brought in so far, and they're named after the camera within Nuke and the frame that you exported on as well. So in this instance, if we look through AnimCam 0030, so the one that just came in, we can see that image that I've just brought in from Nuke, and if I hold down the full stop key, we hide that buffer. Now this is very useful because we can see, as long as I hold this down, the information that we've already projected down onto our object. And because this information was projected down from a point closer to the object than I am with this camera, this is actually a higher resolution image than the image that I've currently got in the buffer. So I'm going to grab my erase tool and I'm going to erase any of the parts that I don't want to bake down. So basically I'm revealing the higher res information between the image data that I've just brought in. Now you guys can obviously spend a little bit kind of longer making sure that this is very nice. I've obviously kind of erased a little bit too much down there at the bottom, but I'm going to call this done. I'm going to hit bake on my keyboard, so that's just the B key, and then I'm going to clear my buffer with this button up the top. And if we quickly take a look around, you can see I've now got both bits of information merged down onto the same object. So at this point we could go in, we could start using Mari's clone tools, Mari's heal tools, paint tools, any reference images you had from set to really make this a nice clean asset and get rid of Alice from our shot. Now we do hit one issue at this point, and that is the fact that we don't quite know how much of our object we actually need to paint up. And definitely in a film environment this is valid, but certainly in a commercials environment you definitely don't want to be doing more work than you need to. So it would be very nice to be able to see exactly how much of our object we need to paint up so we don't waste any extra time. And there's really two ways that we can do this. One begins in Nuke and then ends up in Mari, and the second one is a pure Mari method. So I'm going to show you both. So first of all, I'm going to hop over into Nuke, and down here underneath my original projection I've got something called a coverage map. Now a coverage map, if you're not familiar with it, is a live projection, but instead of projecting on this image data we can see up the top here, we're going to project on a white constant instead. Now the good thing about doing this is that if I view my OBJ, because our camera's live, if I play this back, we now have this white section of our object that represents everything the camera can see on that specific frame. And this is very, very useful for us, because what we can then do is come down and use Nuke's scanline render node to render out this white part of our shot with respect to the UVs of our object. So if I was to play this back right now, what you'll see is the same updating image, but with respect to the UVs of our room object that we have within Nuke. And obviously, this now represents changing image on every single frame, the white being what the camera can see, and the black being what the camera can't see. Now this is kind of useful to us, it's a sequence of images, but we really want just a single image. So I'm going to use a time echo node and a frame hold underneath this, just to merge down this entire timeline into a single black and white image that represents the white section, what the camera can see at any point during our sequence, and the black section, what the camera never sees. Now all I've done is written this out as a coverage map, as an EXR image. I can then go into Mari, I can add a new channel and import that in. And just to show you that, I've actually already created a project over here, so I'm going to switch to that one quickly. And inside this new project, I've got a few shaders set up, and I've also got a few other channels as well. So I'm going to quickly run into my shaders, and we can do this in two ways, either on this right hand side menu, or we can hover over the viewport and hit I to bring up this handy pop-up. So I'm going to go back to my default shader and show you my coverage map channel, which includes the information that we just wrote out of Nuke. Now the easiest way to bring this in, if I go down to my channels dialog, is to create a new channel. You right click and click import, just find that EXR on disk and it will import in with respect to the object, so you can nicely see it there in 3D. Then over in my shaders, if I click fix with coverage, all I've done is set up a fixed channel, which is the one in which I'm going to paint my clean plate. And on top of that, I've put a diffuse blend shader module. Now I've dropped my coverage map in that and set this to multiply. And basically what this does is give us a situation where we want to paint until we can't see any more white along these edges. And when we've done that, we know that everything that needs to be painted up within our scene is completely painted up. Now I said there were two methods of doing this. This coverage map method is the one that involves Nuke. Now I'm just going to switch back to my default shader, and using that eye pop-up, I'm going to go to my fixed channel, and I'm going to show you the second method, which is a Mari only version. So I'm going to hop over into my projectors panel, and at the very, very bottom, underneath all of the cameras that I've brought in to create my clean plate, you can see I've got something called Final Shot Cam. Now this is actually an entire animated FBX cam that we can go and, using the playback menu at the bottom of Mari, playback the entire sequence. So we can see right now that every single thing that we need to paint up from our final shot is completely painted up. Just to be safe as well, I've actually used the fact that Mari is completely Python enabled, and I've brought in a small Python script that allows me to hit Control and minus to do the overscan and underscan of the camera. So at this point you can really see that every single thing that we need to paint is completely painted up, so we're ready to take this back to Nuke. Now the way we do this, bearing in mind that it was basically one click to bring it in, it's equally as simple to take it back out. Now if we had an existing projection set up within Nuke, we could use a Nuke send projection texture method, which would just send over a replacement image. So in Nuke we would just swap from that frame hold over to that brand new projection image, and suddenly our clean plate would be in place. Now I'm not going to use that method here. I'm going to use a slightly more advanced method, which is the current view. Now to show you this, I'm going to double click my final shot cam. I'm going to go to the very end of our sequence, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Now right now, this camera position doesn't exist anywhere within Nuke as an existing camera node. So instead of just sending over a replacement image from Mari to Nuke, we also need to send over a camera. And that's what that Nuke send current view option is going to do. So I'm going to click that now. And basically it's going to take a look at all of the image information we can see on the screen. It's going to grab the current camera information and position as well. It's saved it out as this view option in our projectors list, but over in Nuke what we should see, if everything has gone to plan, is a little 3-node setup that looks like this. So we've brought in this image here. We've also brought in our cam with our translate and rotation information in place. And all I'm going to do is grab this setup, I'm going to drag it up here into this top box and plug that into my asset. And then if we view our asset, what you can see is that that section of the clean plate has now been brought in. And because all of this is static, none of it is going to move over time. So obviously we're not seeing all of our clean plate at this point, so I'm going to go back into Mari and bring back another view. I'm going to go to my final shot cam and double click that guy. I'm going to go back to the very beginning of my shot, again just zoom out a little bit so we get these edges in here for a little bit of overlap. I'm going to go to Nuke, send, current view, and exactly the same thing is going to happen as before. It's going to grab the camera position, the image data, and give that to us to use within Nuke. So at this point we have these two camera setups. Just going to reload that one quickly, and we want to merge these together. So I'm going to select our top Project 3D node, hit our tab menu and bring in a merge matte option, and we want to plug in our second projection. This is going to merge both of those projections together. Now the important thing at this point is to think about the ordering of these projections. Now this one that we brought in first, that looks a little bit like this, is going to be of higher resolution than this one, purely because we're closer to the walls of our room. So this projection at the top here needs to be on top of this one at the bottom. And that's exactly what's going on with our merge matte at the moment. We've got an A projection being put over the B projection. So there's high res one on top of the lower res one. So it's just a nice thing to make sure that all of these are correct. Of course, if they weren't correct, if they were the wrong way around, you could select your node and hit Shift X to change those guys around. But in this instance, I'm going to put it so A is on the top and B is along the side. Now with this done, I'm going to go down and view my geo, and you can see if I disable that merge matte, you can see exactly what's being added into our scene up here. So we've brought in all of this information. Now at this point, with our projections completely static in Nuke's 3D space, we bring back in our tracked animation camera for the entire shot and re-render out this entire sequence. Now with that done, I've gone down here and re-distorted and re-grained as well. And if we take a look at this, what we should see is that everything is going to look really good. Now there is a slight problem though, to be completely honest with you guys, and as soon as we get to about frame 37, you start to notice it over here. And that's the fact that this fan is actually projecting down onto this window, so it doesn't quite match up correctly. The reason for this is that there's no fan geo within the scene. So we could solve this in one of three ways really. We could go to our 3D department and say, hey guys, make me a fan. You could bring that into Mari and paint that up nicely. You could do this within Nuke, maybe position a card in place and send that over to be painted up as well. But because we didn't have a lot of time whilst we were waiting for our plane in South Africa, we decided to mix the very, very good points of this Mari workflow, of our clean plated asset, and the good points of our Nuke 2D compositing workflow, and we did a very quick 2D fix. So I took our original plate over here, I did a very basic bit of roto, so a straight line here and a straight line with a little bit for our fan, and just isolated the sections of our image that we wanted to keep, and then merged those guys back on top. Now this solves a little bit of our shot, but we have another problem at this point, and that's the fact that we now have two fans. So we need to go back into Mari and basically paint out this fan and clean up that window. And that's very, very easy to do with Mari's clone tools, with Mari's heal tools, and as soon as you're done, I'm going to hit my I key, you're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Now right now we need to send this back over into Nuke, but there is a little bit of an issue with this potentially. Let's say that you've got more than just two projections in here. Let's say it's a full 360 degree asset. You maybe have 8, maybe 10 projections to cover the entire part of the shot. You might not want to go in and have to redo every single one of those projections, and that is why there is another way to bring back that information, and I touched on it briefly earlier. So within Mari, as long as this object has UVs, we can go to Nuke, Send, and bring back either all of the channels of our image or the current channel as a UV texture. And that's exactly what I've done over in Nuke. I've brought that back as an 8K texture map, which looks a little bit like this. And what we should see is that if I switch this over, so completely bypass our projection setup at the top here, just plug that nice UV texture right into the top of our geo. As soon as we render that out and plug that back in, we should see basically exactly the same result, but with our fan completely fixed. Then with our final fix in place, I'm going to go down and do our last little bit of work, which is to make sure we're only using a minimal amount of our clean plate, so only the bit that we absolutely need. So down here I've got the roto pass of Alice that someone at DD has thanklessly done for me. I've dilated it, I've blurred it slightly and copied it into the alpha, and then finally pre-molted to isolate just that single section. Now with this done, we can merge it back over the original plate, and you can see if I switch between these frames that for the most part it's a very, very good result. Now, as I said up front, 40 minutes in an airport, there are definitely things that I would change about this, perhaps making these pictures and this poster on the left-hand side a little bit higher resolution. But other than that, I'm very, very happy with the result. And taking it over and treating it as a 3D asset just made a lot of sense, because it becomes very easy to bring in different images, whether it's from the original plate, maybe reference shots taken on set, or things from Google. You paint up that asset and suddenly it's good from every single angle that you need. You paint it up once, you bring it back very quickly with that one button workflow as either a projection setup at the top here or as a UV setup into Nuke, and suddenly you can continue down your comp. It's a very, very straightforward method, and to be honest, the other upshot is that we go from a setup which looks a little bit like this to get to a clean plate to one that looks like this. It's far simpler, far fewer nodes, and to be honest, it's a lot quicker as well. So that's about it for this look at the Nuke Mari Bridge in a production workflow. Massive thanks again to DD for allowing us to use their awesome footage for this. And I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and I hope you can see exactly how you might be able to use this bridge in your own workflows, whether it's for things like a clean plate setup, as we've seen today, or even if it's just small things like projection seam fixing, projection stretching fixing, that we all come across almost every day within Nuke projection setups. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and we'll try and get back to you ASAP, but that's about it from me, so thank you very much, guys.